working on the Muncie Jewish Oral History Project. This evening, I'm interviewing Mr. Alan Burgauer in his home here in Muncie, Indiana, March 20, 1979. Mr. Burgauer, I wonder if we begin our interview by giving me some information along the lines that we just spoke about a few moments ago, namely, if you could tell me a few things about your grandparents, where they came from in the old country, where they came when they finally emigrated and ended up in the United States.
Well, my grandfathers both are from Germany, and my grandmothers were both from Switzerland. And on my mother's side, they settled in Monessen, Pennsylvania, and in my father's side, he settled in Cleveland, Ohio. And I never met my mother's family, but my father's family, after my father come to Muncie, they later then came to Muncie to live. And
okay. Do you have any idea why your grandparents left the old country to come to America?
No.
Okay.
No. Well, I suppose because of maybe they thought that better opportunity or something.
Okay, American dream.
They
could fulfill that better here than they could in the old country. Well, tell me a little bit about your parents then, how they happened to meet, where they were living.
Well, my mother was living in Monessen, Pennsylvania, and my father was living in Cleveland. And through a mutual acquaintance, they got acquainted and were married. My father when he was 32, and my mother when she was 30. My father had been married once before, but not for very long. And that's about all I can say for that. I can tell you how they come to Muncie.
Well, let me ask you first what line of work your father was in.
My father was worked for an office machine dealer in Cleveland, and he decided he'd go out for himself. And he didn't work Cleveland himself much. He'd come down in Indiana and called on county seats and places, probably once a year, and rode to interurban or other transportation. And he never did drive a car. He owned some, but he never drove them. And that's how he happened to settle in Muncie, and later because of central Indiana.
So the appeal of coming to Muncie for him was that he could start in business here?
Yeah, because he'd already been here, and he just thought it'd be a good place to start.
Okay.
At that time, well, he actually had a place in Cleveland and a place here. And in those days, a place could have been a very small place, half as big as this room. I mean, with practically no inventory.
What was the office machine business like at that time?
Well, I'll tell you, looking back in some records that I had occasion to look, my dad had occasion to look up for me, it was the volume of business, even after I was grown some, would be about $5,000 or $6,000 worth of business a year. Which, of course, he told me at that time, a man making $2 a day could own his own home.
Today you could buy a bag of M&Ms.
Raise a family and own his own home. Although he didn't own a home until many years later than that. And that was a peculiar thing, and I'll mention it. How they got the home, my mother's parents had passed away, both of them, and in the estate, she inherited enough money to buy a house. And that's how they got the house.
That's a good form of down payment.
Yeah. Well, that paid for the whole house, and it was under $4,000, and it was an 8-room house.
As you look back on your early years, both from your perspective and as you view your parents looking back on their lives, what was life like in the Jewish community in days gone by in Muncie?
Well, it would be a great deal different than it would be in the city. There was very few, and there was well, since most of my friends happened to be not Jewish, even as a kid, because where we lived there, well, Bernard Friend lived across the street at one time.
Where did you live? Where did you grow up?
I was born and raised here.
And what Give me a street location.
On West Howard Street, that's 7 blocks west of Walnut. No, that's where I grew up, but I first only lived 2 places as I can recall, and lived on South Liberty Street in a half of a double during the First World War. I remember that. I remember that my dad used to buy potatoes by the bushel and apples by the bushel. And during the war, we had eggs down in water glass, and when you'd go to eat them, they didn't taste like eggs, but they were eggs. I remember he bought a goose for some holiday or something, and when we killed the goose, he knew this was work, and he got the squawker out of it, and you could blow on that, it sounded just like a goose.
Probably good for hunting. What were the occupations of most of the Jewish people?
Most of the Jewish people in a small community then, more so than even now, were people that come here with, like they were peddlers or one thing or another, and they somehow or other opened some kind of a little business. And adding something to that, sometimes there's been a misconception that Jewish people always had businesses, but they didn't. And in the bigger cities, of course, they worked just like anybody else for somebody else. In fact, I was surprised. I didn't know that till I was older and got down there and saw people that worked at the factory and worked for somebody else in the tailor shop and worked in a department store and all such things as that.
As you look back on the Jewish community, particularly from an economic standpoint here in Muncie, were most of these people who came to Muncie at the time that your parents did relatively successful? I mean, I get the feeling in interviewing these people that a lot of them really did pretty well.
I'd say most of them were successful. But I also think that many other people, whether they be Jewish or otherwise, wouldn't have been successful because they wouldn't have done the things they did done to make themselves successful, like having a store up front and living behind the store and such as that. See, I know some cases of that.
Oh yeah, the area I grew up in New York City, there were all kinds of people that owned stores of that kind and lived above them, not so much behind them, because you had storefronts and then you'd walk up and people lived above their places of employment, their place of business.
I got a friend around the corner who he keeps wanting to tell me that the Jewish people are smarter than other people, but I couldn't say that. He says they're smarter. I said, well, maybe because they're a minority, they just work harder at it.
Well, was there much social life within the Jewish community as far as social interaction?
Mostly just in relation to going to temple and such as that and having little doings once in a while.
Were there any clubs that your parents belonged to or that you belonged to within the temple?
My dad didn't belong to any. The only club there would have been the B'nai B'rith, and he wasn't a real active Jew, and I'm not overly active. And I had belonged to the thing, but I don't belong to it now because I never went to the meetings. I didn't see any reason. I always paid my dues, but I never went.
As you see your home life, and I'm approaching this on 2 generations, the way you've raised your children and the way you were raised by your parents, do you think that Jewish values were really important within your home?
No, I think that in some other Jewish homes they might have been more values. I don't think I would have ever went to Sabbath school, that's it, Sabbath school. Except from my mother. My dad just wasn't, I don't know, he wasn't against anything, he just wasn't active at it.
What has been the relationship in your generation between the Jewish people in Muncie and the non-Jewish people in Muncie?
Well, when I was a youngster, you used to have a lot of people, and that's changed a lot. They get a little mad at you, they call you a dirty Jew, see. I never gotten any fights over it, but I think it's different now. I know it's different.
Why do you think that's happened? Why do you think there is that change? I agree with you, but I just wonder how you see that.
I'll give you a little sample of why I think I can tell you in just one little thing that happened with my wife. When our daughter was born, and she'd wheel the baby up and down the sidewalk around the block, she met a non-Jewish person about 2 doors from us, and they'd talk a little bit, and then one day she said to my wife, she said, Bertha, she says, I always thought Jewish people were different, but you're not different.
So they found out there really was great similarity after all.
Well, I guess, yeah, I'd say there's Jewish people that are very similar to some non-Jewish people, and vice versa, as you might say. And they actually are telling you when they say, I thought that they just didn't know, just didn't have no reason to have either thought. And a lot of times I've called on people and they'd say something about the Jews, and I just always let them know I was Jewish, and they always would say to you, well, we didn't mean you.
You're the exception.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you recall any specific incidents in your life of anti-Semitism as far as your own career is concerned, or your personal life?
No, I don't really. Like I said, most people wouldn't have known I was Jewish, except when something like that come up, or they'd ask me what church I go to, and I told them I go to Jewish temple. No, I never really had personally much of that. In fact, most of my play days as a kid and fun and things that I'd done, and fishing and hunting and one thing and another, the answer to that whole thing is there was a sporting goods store man in town by the name of Earl Ress, and I used to go down there on Saturday evening when I was about 15, 16 years old. And when anybody new'd come in there that he hadn't introduced me to, he'd say, I want you to meet Alan Burgauer, he'd tell him. He said, did you ever hear of a Jew that went fishing and hunting?
Yeah, I know a lot of them in New York City.
Yeah.
People I grew up with.
Yeah.
That's true, though. You don't associate those sorts of outdoor activities.
Because all they associated them with is probably they run some little business or something like that.
Yeah, retail trade.
Yeah.
Now, you did say that your family and you and your own family and this generation, that you have always belonged to the temple.
Well, I've always belonged, and my mother always went to temple, yes. But my father never went often. He was leaving just personal things out. He was a upright, forthright man. He was conservative like I am, only to a bigger degree.
Was Zionism of any importance in your home?
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it?
Not back in those days, no.
Oh, okay.
No, that's too new for that.
How did you happen to become interested in your life work? I think I know the answer, but I want you to tell me.
Well, that's the funny thing. I suppose because I was kind of close to it. My dad was in the business, or had been from 1907 until 1930, and I had worked other places before I went in there to work when I was younger than at the time I did go there, and I worked in the fruit market, and I worked in the clothing store, in the shoe store. In fact, after I got down working for my dad, a new manager come to Tom McCann, and he come down and he wanted me to come back to work. And I never even met the man. And I see a guy now at the coffee that I attend, and we reminisce about them times. He was older, and he was the assistant manager. They wouldn't even take a store, but he wouldn't. And we talk over old things and about the fellows that worked there and what we'd done after work. After work, we mopped all the floors.
What do you think are the most important changes that have occurred in your profession during your lifetime?
Well, you mean the most radical difference?
Yeah, as you see it. I mean, here's a veritable revolution that's taken place.
Well, I see two phases of it. One of them, the small use that people made of the office equipment, to the great use they then later used it because of more detail they had to perform, and because of that need, why inventors come up with adding machines and duplicating machines and all sorts of that, because there was a sale for it. And I know of very few Jewish people had anything to do with the manufacture of them directly. It's always some guy invented it, and it was very crude. And as I remember, when the first one I saw that would subtract. And then, of course, the big change now in computing equipment is electronics, which is another field.
So in your lifetime, though, you've really viewed a revolution in this area.
Oh, yeah.
And this must have created some problems as far as keeping inventory, keeping up with the changing machines and demands.
Never know. Most dealers wouldn't be into all them things at one time. Most office machine dealers wouldn't be in the cash register business, which we were, and later got into it. I remember when we first went in the adding machine business, a fellow called on us from Grand Rapids, and they had a 6-column adding machine without subtraction. It was $55. And I knew there was a future for it, and so my dad, he thought there might be, so he ordered one. And he said, "You sell that and I'll get another one."
Now that's conservative.
and that was his problem. He wouldn't take any chance. And he since he wasn't out in the field, he always stayed inside. He wasn't a serviceman, and he was a salesperson in the office, but he didn't go on the road to any great extent. Back in about 1925 or 6, when I was a kid, I went with him and the serviceman, and we went out of town, and I'd pass blotters with advertising on them. But he actually didn't. He didn't go out to any great extent even then, and never drove a car. Owned some old Model T Fords and such as that, so the man could go, and had turtlebacks, they were called. You ever see them?
Yeah.
Well, they took that off, and they built a box thing on there with doors with a lock on it. They put some machines in there, and they could show them when they was out in the field, see. I remember we went one time down to Cincinnati for more of a weekend, and the whole differential went out of the Chevrolet, and he had like to have a fit because we had to stay over until you get a new rear end put in the car. And they put a whole new rear end, axle shafts and everything in there for $115 back in those days.
How active have you been in the Jewish community here in town?
Just not as active as most people that you have on that list. Yeah.
How about you mentioned B'nai B'rith before. Have there been any other social clubs throughout your lifetime?
None that I ever knew were here. Did you get any different opinions from anybody else?
No, mostly the opinions I got had to do with people playing cards. There seemed to be a lot of bridge players around.
I don't play cards. I played years ago and enjoyed it, and I haven't got time for one game of cards.
What community affairs have you been involved with? Any organizations that have particularly interested you?
Well, I'm interested in I got interested in by going to a Christian camp, YMCA. I was a member of YMCA when I was 8 years old, and I was supposed to be 9. I learned to swim there, and this is a peculiar one. They had what they call Bible study in the schools, and when I was in high school, maybe a freshman or sophomore, I signed up for it. I didn't know what it was, but it was a course of the Bible, and it had a lot to do with Christianity, of course, which I guess we don't believe in. But I took a test, and I won and Bernard Friend did too. Won a week to Camp Causey free and got 100 on the test. And then I went another 2 weeks later on, a year or two later. Then I got interested in, and I belonged to the YMCA. Learned to swim in the YMCA before my dad even knew I belonged. And later I went through the Camp Causey thing. I got interested in Camp Causey alumni, and I'm still active in it. I think it's a good organization. It's an organization that tries to give a little of your time and a little of your money, not too much, to send boys to camp who can't afford to go otherwise.
Yeah, well, I think it is a good organization.
Yeah.
No doubt of that. You still hunt and fish?
Not as much as I did.
That has nothing to do with the Jewish community. I'm just interested.
No, not as much as I did. Somehow or other, I'm not able to do all the things and get them done that I want to do that's not hunting and fishing, so and I'm all right close to it, see, like gardening and take care of the yard and upkeep my home and go up and tinker around up the office quite often. But I don't go fishing that much. I did go fishing last summer some. I went, when I couldn't find anybody to go, I went out anyhow, come home with a nice mess of fish out in the gravel pit. Yeah.
Where did you meet your wife?
Here in Muncie. She was visiting her sister. And
where is she from?
Louisville, Kentucky. I knew her from Valentine's Day, a few days before Valentine's Day, till when we got married in May, the 1st.
What year was that?
38.
The year my wife was born.
And she can't give or take a year. She don't even know how old she is.
Good. No woman should know.
Well, but she's wrote to find out her birth certificate.
Oh.
She wants to draw Social Security sometime.
Oh, yeah. Right. Were you in the armed forces at all?
No, I wouldn't. Okay. I was never in 1A. We happened to be a dealer at that time for Smith Corona typewriter, and all the draft boards had that kind. And I got an automatic deferment because of my occupation. And I almost give it up, the occupation. My dad and I had some words about how much it took me to get along with my wife and one youngster. And I went home and talked to her and went back and told him that if he didn't change it, maybe this is too personal, but it isn't. My wife left it up to me, and I'm leaving. And I'll probably go to service, but I'm going to leave. I'm not going to go along with this deal we got. And we straightened that out, and I just let her go at that. So my brother was in the service for a year, but he injured his ankle or something of that nature. And I think that was it. And they discharged him. But I wasn't in the armed service.
Well, as I indicated at the outset, the final question that I've asked all of the individuals I've interviewed is to ask you to give me your thoughts on what you think the future of the Jewish community is in a town like Muncie.
Well, I think the future of the community, you say?
Yes.
In all aspects?
Well, specifically the Jewish community.
Well, I meant speaking.
Right, in all aspects. Yeah.
Well, I think that we're already finding that the mixed marriages is going to change the community as far as the Jewish people is concerned. Because quite often when you have a thing like that, they end up neither one of them going any place. And I think it's going to get smaller. In fact, the bigger people in the Jewish religion, reading what's that article in the little paper?
The Hadassah?
No,
The Post?
Well, maybe, and there's that thought all over.
So you think that will tend to cut down the number of people?
Well, I think it'll tend down. For instance, I got 3 sons. Now, the oldest one belongs to B'nai B'rith, and one of the daughters goes to Temple. My other 2 sons have no children, but they're not, and none of the 3 of them are married Jewish. And frankly, I would rather, I'd have to be real frank about it. I imagine if my wife hadn't come here visiting her sister, I might not have married Jewish. I wasn't interested in anybody, but by the same token, there was no eligible Jewish girls here at my age or anywhere near. And I just don't believe I'd go to Indianapolis to meet one, or Louisville, or Chicago, or any place. I just don't believe I would have.
So you think marriage is the most important change that will take place?
Those mixed marriages, I think, is the big difference. Because you find that quite a number of Jewish, of course, of these people you're speaking of,
right.
Either they have daughters and no sons, but a lot of the sons have gotten into the business their father was, like
right.
Marty Schwartz and,
right.
And Dobros and the Zieglers and most of them, and Sam Gold was an old timer, but he's passed. His daughter's still around. You never.
Mrs. Latham?
Yeah.
Yes, I plan to talk with her.
Oh, all right. Well, she had no sons, and they wouldn't carry that name anyhow. But then that wouldn't be the big thing. They had no sons, all daughters. So it's just going to get smaller. Although there's a number of Jewish people that come to town that didn't originate here.
Yeah, mostly Ball State, I might add.
Yes.
Not that many, I don't think, that are
Well,
outside
there's
the
some from
university.
Ball State, and we have some that infiltrated here.
Good word, infiltrated.
Yeah. Yeah, they got here all right. Well, the Hertzes is one family. There's
Yeah.
several of them. See, they're
That's
not
right.
original here.
That's right.
But they've been here long enough to call almost a native.
Oh yeah, when you get in the second generation, you still have people here. That's true.
See, I'm in the fourth generation.
Yeah,
My
right.
my kids are. Yeah, on one half of them, my family, our grandparents. On the other one, I never met them. My mother's family, there was quite a few children there, and there was quite a few in my father's family.
Well, are there any other comments that you'd like to make? This has been a very interesting interview.
No,
If there's anything you'd
I'll
like to
comment.
add.
I think it's interesting too.
Oh, well, I
Because-
certainly do.
Because I'll tell you, it gets you to thinking on
That's right.
back.
That's right. And I use a grand quotation at the beginning of one of my course syllabuses for my honors class at Ball State, which is an Abraham Lincoln quote. And it says this: "Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history." End of quotation.
You weren't interviewing. Oh, you didn't work on the interview, Alda Ziegler.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. She had a lot of. She had 3 or 4 uncles. And her dad was Max.
Yeah, we plan to interview anybody we can get a hold of. We're not drawing the line.
Well, she could tell you. And Art Sobel got into the junk business through his father-in-law. So he probably could answer almost as much as I could, I suppose, because you get acquainted with other things, even though you might not have been there all the time. He was studying to be a dentist, so he met Alda, and I think he saw a good opportunity in the junk business. Well, they're not in the junk business anymore. But,
Well, that seems to have been a good opportunity for a lot of people in this part of Indiana.
well, yeah.
Junk business,
That
and
left
scrap.
You said in Fort Wayne?
Yeah.
Well, they got a big operation.
Yeah.
This is one I'm thinking about.
Right.
And bigger than Max Ziegler's place. Oh my gosh! When I was over there one day, they must have had 40 people working in the yard. They're so big that they actually buy from other junk dealers.
Large commercial operation.
Well, they must have connections, and they mix their stuff and get bigger quantities. They have to separate a lot of stuff. It's a business I know nothing about.
Nor do I.
But I think they know something about it because they seem to be successful, most of them.
Well, let me end tape. I want to thank you for giving me your time. This has been Warren Vanderhill speaking with Mr. Alan Burgauer as part of the Muncie Jewish Oral History Project on March 20, 1979.